Thank you very much for that introduction and for inviting me to this AGM meeting of the Near Eastern Archaeology Foundation. I'm really honoured to be here. Now, without any ado, let's get straight into it. My interest in Malta was sparked by William Cullican, who lectured in the History Department at the University of Melbourne. He was a renowned scholar in the field of Phoenicians. Malta became one of the major settlements of the Phoenicians and their Punic descendants in the Mediterranean. When I first visited the archipelago, I planned to write an article concerning Phoenician colonisation. It became apparent there was a wealth of unpublished material from hundreds of Phoenician Punic tombs that was poorly understood and a sequence that spanned for over 1,000 years, in need of refinement. I soon realised that I had a topic for my PhD. But like so many before me, I was lured hook, line and sinker and delved even deeper into the truly fascinating archaeological record of the archipelago. Now, Margaret Alice Murray was equally drawn into Malta's intriguing archaeology, and her fieldwork and research was in the southern sector of the main island of Malta. But first, let's set the scene. Malta lies in the central Mediterranean, 93 kilometres from Sicily and 180 kilometres from North Africa. There are 5 main islands in the group: Malta, Gozo, Comino, Cominotto, and a lesser rocky outcrop called Filfla, not shown on this map, to the south, as well as some smaller islets. To give you a sense of scale, in this NASA satellite photo, note the international airport. And that's it just there. So you can see that it's actually occupies quite a large area of Malta. The main island is small, no more than 246 square kilometres, 27 kilometres long and 14.5 kilometres at its widest point. But packed within this area is an array of remarkable archaeology, and the same can be said for the North Island of Gozo. A lot's been written about Margaret Murray, including her own autobiography, My First 100 Years. It's really remarkable that she lived that long, truly. Murray was a pioneer in women's involvement in Egyptology, in archaeology, and an active supporter of women's equality. When her teaching commitments at the University College of London were such that she could no longer participate in fieldwork with Flinders Petrie in Egypt during the winter seasons, she turned to the Maltese Archipelago after meeting Themistocles Zamit in London. Zamit was a medical doctor, but as director of the museum in Valletta, he is also recognised for his archaeological skill. It was 1920 and he was in the region to receive an honorary doctorate from the University of Oxford. So here, of course, we have Murray, Sir William Matthews Flinders, and here is Murray as a younger woman unwrapping a mummy, which was a very important and quite exciting event for the populace. You can see by the packed auditorium that she had. And really, for what she achieved, quite a small in stature as well. Murray's publications. Her work in Malta is significant, and it would be a mistake to dismiss or overlook her contribution to the early archaeological investigations of the island. She published 4 volumes concerning her fieldwork, and they were reviewed in a number of journals. Most recognised the skills shown by her for archaeological fieldwork, but also they recognised her fortitude, because summers in Malta are truly intense, and where she worked was quite exposed to the elements. So here's a satellite image to show you the basic south-eastern area where Murray worked. I'll show you, just point out some of the sites. So I'll talk a little bit about Massaschlock Bay, but within that is St. George's Bay. She worked at these sites here, at Tabakari and Santa Sofia, very close to what became the first airfield that was so important in Malta in World War II. But it also destroyed one of the sites. Where she worked eventually, that was most important, is this one here, Borġ in-Nadur. And just near there, I'll also talk about this little piece of point of land pointing into the bay, which became important along the way. Santa Sofia, where she was first working, was destroyed by the construction of Malta's first airfield at Halfar. So important. It had 2 runways that have now been converted into a road, and the other is used for drag racing. You do, yes. And here is Zamit as a younger man, as an older man with many decorations. Where Murray dug was somewhere around here. There are some scatters of prehistoric sherds in the region, and this standing stone, a menhir, does survive in the region, but I don't know if it was connected to the original site where she worked. The other site was at Santa Maria Tel Bakari, and it was in better shape. But as you can see by these 2 photos, it was a small chapel, and even though it incorporated some of prehistoric stones, it only had a shallow deposit. I would have loved to have been at the meeting between Temi Zamit and Murray when she requested a better location. As she noted in her autobiography, and I quote, "After I had remonstrated at being given at the most least interesting sites to excavate, I obtained the concession of the megalithic site of Borġ, end quote." So Murray was particularly interested in the late Neolithic and the monumental stone buildings, generally referred to as temples. Indeed, this whole period is generally known as the Temple period. On the right is a chronological chart showing the broad prehistoric cultural sequence from the Neolithic at the top through the late Neolithic and into the Bronze Ages in the green section at the bottom. In the lower left hand of the slide is a ground plan of the late Neolithic complex at in-Nadur, close to the cliffs and further west along the coastline where Murray worked. It shows the typical lobed building plan of the Neolithic structures. So just over here, you can see the lobed plans. And also a view of the site and some elaborate shelves and niches that were often built into these kinds of structures, preserved in the better preserved sites. Overall, there are about 32 such monumental buildings in various states of preservation in the Maltese Archipelago. Here is another picture of another site very close to in-Nadur. It's about 1 kilometre away, further up the slope. Both sites are very close to the cliff face. It shows, it's called Hajaim, and it has a monumental curved facade shown in the slide. And one of the typical statues found in it, as well as its lobed ground plan. And you can see on that plan how it's more buildings have been spliced into it. And so you can see like the original buildings there. Also note in the photo, the canopy that's been built over this site of Hajaim and also in-Nadur. In Gigantia, in the North Island of Gozo, is another very large complex. It shows massive slabs. This is the back wall showing massive slabs used in its construction, and in another photo showing the internal shelves and niches. The plan, like other sites, illustrates the more than one structure could be built side by side or even spliced together like we saw in the other plan. This was the type of complex that Murray wanted to excavate. But before we get to Murray's site, I'd also want to mention 2 burial hypogea that is connected to these sites. This one is the hypogeum of Halsaflieni, close to the Tarshen complex in Malta. Another is the Jara Circle in Gigantia in Gozo. This one, Halsaflieni, is structurally the best preserved. Several thousand skeletons were excavated there. Among the objects left with the deceased is this reclining figure, which is considered to be one of the artistic masterpieces in Europe. I believe, and it's only tiny, but it would fit in the palm of a man's hand quite comfortably. I believe that of the whole collection of skeletal remains that they found, about several skulls have been preserved, and the rest of the remains were ground for fertilizer. Happily, however, we have the Jara Circle in Gozo, which has been excavated in recent years in much skilled archaeological excavations and with great precision. And in recent times, it's been fully published. But before I leave Halsaflieni, As many of you know, prehistoric sites often attract a range of interpretations, and numerous theoretical discussions have grown up around them, and Malta is no exception. Spirals, the use of red ochre, notions of the divine, trance states, and so on are likely to have played out in sites like Halseflieni. At an elementary level, we can compare the nature of the decoration on the contemporary sites below and above ground. They are quite different. In subterranean Halseflieni, on the left of the slide, red ochre has been used to paint free-flowing open curls and spirals on the ceilings of 2 chambers. On the right, above ground designs at Tarshen, which is nearby, are repeating, controlled and balanced with precision cutting of the stone. The same can be said for the architecture. Below ground, unpredictable, at times dangerous pits were cut in the floors. Steps could stop well above floor levels, and monumental doorways led nowhere. Above ground, generally predictable, lobed plans like we've seen, controlled entrances and rooms were very normal and predictable. Such differences invite explanation, and this is the stomping ground, the field ground of theorists. Oh, before I go on, Halseflieni is in 3 levels. This little line that runs right through is an indication of that's roughly where the original entrance was, and the light would filter down as far as that, but the lower levels apparently would be almost plunged into complete darkness. But nonetheless, if you go back in antiquity, none of these areas would have been brilliantly lit like we have now. So in those sort of conditions, you can get trance states happening anyway without any other stimulus. The figurines from burials in Jara Circle in Gozo can convey the same notion of well-rounded human form, indicating the importance of food production and abundance for its inhabitants. Peg figures, on the other hand, on the right, have a more shamanistic quality. Some figures are well cut, others seem unfinished, and animal heads must have also had some meaning to the people. And apparently this group here was found in a cluster together as if they'd been in a bag. And the various ones here, the sort of things that people can discuss and argue about are listed here, like colour, hairstyle, scarification of the body, body posture, and even just the corpulent nature of the bodies. And some of these come from different sites in Malta. This one from Jara Circle, or these two, might have scarification on the body, but that's not a very typical thing. Now, of course, many theoretical discussions revolve around religious function of these megalithic structures, and it seems a natural association to identify the rounded figurines as goddesses. But with very few exceptions, the gender of the figures is actually ambiguous. But food preparation areas, especially multiple well-used mortars around the above-ground sites, may indicate that the buildings perhaps served as food storage areas as well, or could have even been used as dwellings. The fact that there are very few more modest houses being found around the sites also support this notion. No doubt Murray was very keen to tap into this late Neolithic record when she began work at Borġ. This satellite image is of the site. Despite later interventions and collapse of some stones, we can still make out the lobed plan of the late Neolithic structure and a large walled forecourt. So there is the lobed plan that you can just make out there, possibly a second one beside it, and the forecourt, which had walls around it. Here are some more recent photos of the site taken between 1990s and 2000s. The top 2 photos show the Masashlock Bay in the distance and the general nature of the sometimes collapsed stones. One of Murray's biographers, Kathleen Shepherd, noted that there are no existing field notes from Murray's excavations. Murray's detailed reports, however, clearly reflect the documentation that she made at the time, as well as plans of the site, which are shown on the left. And I've added annotations from her notebooks and any publications that she had on the right of the completed plans once she'd finished working at Borġ. Now, of the pottery, collection in the Valletta Museum, one recent publication concerning the re-examination of Murray's finds noted, and I quote, "It is not known in which way Murray marked the fragments after the excavations, and no traces of signs previous to those made in 1952 by John Evans can be observed on the pieces, except for one specimen," end quote. And that fragment simply had 1924 inked on its surface. This to me is an unfortunate error or a misrepresentation. It is quite clear that a good number of fragments have been marked by another hand, not that of John Evans, some illustrated here on the left. If more attention had been paid to Murray's plans of the site, it would have been possible to make the association. And I've put purple rings around sites which match the ones on the sherds on the left, as you can see. Blue highlights on the plan are later Bronze Age sites. So these little areas of, now the point is, well, the blue highlights that I've put there show where the actual Bronze Age sites are. So there was a mixture here of late Neolithic and Bronze Age material. Around 2500 BC, it seems that the Neolithic indigenous communities were ready for a change, perhaps driven by more arid conditions. However, there are signs that they carried out closure rituals for their massive lobed complexes. Tarshen was partially backfilled with clean sand after its shells were stacked with animal bones. Stone roof slabbing material may have been removed intentionally from the late Neolithic complexes and were reused. Some possible roof slabs are shown on the right. So this is over the Missar tanks. You can see here a little rebate edge, cleverly interlocking the stones together. And at Borġ itself, later excavations for this infrastructure of pipes for some reason revealed two long slabs here. No one's put this forward before, so I've made this connection. It's not proven, but to me it seems like they're very good candidates for the removing of the roof. And once you do that with any building, deterioration starts quite quickly. But also, in terms of decommissioning buildings, we have the some of these statues which also show damage, purposeful damage. This one's from Tussilch, which is a Phoenician Punic site, which had also incorporated prehistoric material within it. And this one here is from Tarshen, a very large statue, larger than real life. I've put a woman's foot figure there as an example. Probably the upper structure, part of it would have looked like that. But no other pieces of that statue are found at Tarshen. So it must have been taken away. So some of the buildings were reoccupied, but and various functions inside them changed at that point. The late Neolithic when the late Neolithic life petered out around 2500 BC, there is a clear indication that the island was infiltrated with newcomers who made Malta their home. The first signs of contact came with examples of a pottery known as thermware that started to appear in isolated instances in the late Neolithic complexes. And I've shown one in the top, almost in the centre. Other pottery types seem to have come from Lipari, Sicily, and the eastern lands of the Adriatic Sea. The new cultural horizon is known as the Tarshen Cemetery period, shown with the asterisks in the first green section on the right. It was marked by the introduction of cremation, burials, and also metal weaponry, like you see the copper daggers there, and also dolmen, as you can see there. That dolmen is located in Gozo on a very high point with a spectacular view, and they're dotted around the islands. The Tarshen Cemetery period sites are few, but Borġ was one of them where Murray worked. The next group to appear in Malta is known as the Borġ culture because their pottery was first recognised at that site. This is generally considered to be Middle Bronze Age. Their closest links suggest Sicily as an origin. They also built modest homes, but had a preference for high ground with defensive advantages. For example, Wardiata St. George, shown on the left. Comparatively speaking, this culture was distributed widely across the islands, but there seemed to be some mingling of two traditions for a short time, judging by the deposits at Borġ. I've shown also some typical Borġ pottery in the centre, the variations in shapes, and some little glimpses of the pottery, usually red slipped, sometimes burnished, sometimes just left matte. So an argument can be made that a significant point of entry into Malta at this time was through the Masashlock Bay. A substantial Bronze Age fortification wall was built around the Borġ site. And within it, the remains of very modest dwellings have been exposed through excavations. So here is where Murray worked, and the Borġ site is around this area like that. So it's quite a large area. The top left plan, it was an early plan made in the 1880s when a small amount was excavated by Antonio Caruana. Beneath it is the plan made by David Trump, who excavated another small area of the settlement, Bronze Age settlement, in 1959. The scale of the D-shaped bastion to the north makes the megalithic structures to the south, which were huge, look small. And it could be asked if there was any significance that it faced inland. Here are views of the substantial fortifications, and you can see Masashlock Bay in the distance in the top right photo. So they're really quite massive fortifications. I came across a book by an antiquarian, Andrew Leith Adams, pictured here. He'd made a small sketch of a series of rock-cut pits at the bay, shown in the lower left, that pointed into St. George's Bay within the larger Masashlock Bay, but only a few minutes walk from the Borġ ruins. Sorry, I've skipped forward there. So there's the pits there. That's all I had to go on. And I thought I'd never heard of this before when I was doing all my research and just was intrigued. So I went and had a look. So here is the aerial photograph of the site showing the pits, and just to point out where it is. There's that little peninsula of land that I spoke about that we'd be talking about. Here is Masashlock Bay, and that is St. George's Bay, that little area there. And the pits are just here, and you can see the damage to them. On this plan, I've plotted the visible sites here, just like in that photograph, and here are photographs here. When I first walked up to the site, this is what I saw. So I couldn't believe how small it was. And the black spots are the spots for the vats or pits that have been obscured by modern infrastructure. So you've got a road running here. So when they put the bitumen down, it covered them all. And this is sort of recreational area. Now, I argued that these pits functioned as dye vats for the production of purple dye from the glands of the Murex seashell. Estimates suggest that some 12,000 mollusks were needed to produce a single gram of dye. The earliest date of the purple dye industry in the Mediterranean comes from Coppa Navigata in Apulia, Italy. Research has demonstrated that purple dye production started there sometime around the 19th to 18th centuries BC, becoming an important industry in the Middle Bronze Age, spanning the 15th to 14th century BC. I suspect that such textile hubs probably brought purple dye production to Malta. Textile tools were notably the T-shaped ceramic objects shown in the centre, which were likely used to manage skeins of yarn generally and for dipping the yarn into the dye during the process. Also conical loom weights on the right, and there are also spindle whorls, and most of those sort of implements are found wherever Bronze Age sites are in Malta. Illegal digging in the year 2000 around Borġ revealed archaeological deposits, notably 3 vats within the perimeter of the Bronze Age in the upper arrow, as well as deposits closer to the shore where the other red arrow is. Archaeological assessment of the damage reported, and I quote, "A thick layer of ash was also revealed lying over bedrock." Without legal and systematic archaeological excavations, one can only speculate that the ash resting on the bedrock and outside the Neolithic complex dated to the Bronze Age and had been accumulated during the dye process that involved the heating of the dye solution. So, well, you can see where the asterisk is. The pointer is not always working. Where the asterisk is the ash layer, the thick black area, and the arrow points to an ancient wall that was hidden by a terrace as well. Now, we've come a long way since Margaret Murray's work in Malta, but she earned recognition for the work she carried out at Borġ. Given the nature of the ruined buildings and the cultural deposits, she made quite a reasonable account of a very complex site. Nor did she neglect the later finds and began the difficult task of determining the characteristics of the Bronze Age culture in Malta. And just before I finish up, the top photo with the rainbow, it was a pretty miserable day in Malta, and I thought, oh, just on a Sunday, where will I go? I'll go look at Hajar-im, one of those major temple sites. And it's useful because you can see there the canopy that covers those 2 sites. But when I got out of the bus, there was the rainbow, and I thought, I have got to get this photo. So I ran past the ticket booth with the man yelling at me, "You've got to buy a ticket." And I just kept going because to get into the complex, you've got to go into the fenced off area. But I really thought it was worthwhile. But anyway, I've put my book at the bottom there. If any of you are interested in Malta, can't get there, but if you can, it's a wonderful archipelago to visit. But the satellite images that I've shown are the app Google Earth that anyone can have on their laptops. The resolution for Malta is remarkable. You can get to well under 100 meters above the surface of the land. And at the back of my book, wherever I've been able to, I've given the coordinates for people to be able to find them on the ground, but Google Earth, go for it, because you can get down pretty close and see what the sites look like, at least from an aerial point of view. Thank you.